everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support, and we're here today with Joshua Pops, who is an elder law attorney here in town. And I want him to introduce himself related to why he does what he does. But I would like to remind you that if you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And when we're finished, then we will go to the questions and he'll answer them for you. So Joshua Pops, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn said, my name is Joshua Pops. I'm an attorney in Vancouver. I practice entirely estate planning and elder law. I always tell clients, if you get arrested, I am not the lawyer you call from prison. I practice entirely estate planning and elder law. That involves the typical estate planning, powers of attorney, wills, trusts, some guardianships, and a lot of what we're talking about today, which is qualifying for Medicaid. A little bit about my background, since I'm happy to share. I've been involved helping out with Hope for quite a while. I got involved with this when my mother was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My dad was a frequent attendee. I still have a soft spot for his Thursday morning group. You know, I've always enjoyed. This has been, the most meaningful part by far in my practice. The estate planning part is nice and pays the bills, but Medicaid planning is what I'm really most passionate about. I'm glad everyone is able to attend. We have right now 41. Great. I would tell all of you who are on this call, if you're attending a Hope group, good for you. You're doing the most important thing you can. When I'm talking to someone for the first time about Alzheimer's or dementia, the very first thing practically that I'm asking is, have you heard about Hope? Would you try a support group? If you're going to Hope, forget the legal mumbo jumbo. You're already doing the most important thing for you. Obviously, Medicaid is something that comes up a lot in a lot of different Hope groups. A lot of people here probably have a loved one who is already on Medicaid or was on Medicaid before they passed away. When we're talking about Medicaid, we're talking about long-term care Medicaid. There's different types of programs, but what we're talking about is long-term care Medicaid. That's a joint state and federal funded program that provides basically funds to pay for long-term care. Some people use it to have a paid caregiver in their home to care for their loved one. A lot of the times we're talking about placing someone in an adult family home, an assisted living facility, or a skilled nursing facility, and figuring out a way to pay for that care. Typically, we're talking about the vast majority. If you're in Hope, you have a loved one who has Alzheimer's or dementia, you have them, or there might be someone in the group that you know who's in an adult family home, small, privately run house. My mom's in an adult family home. She's one of 5 little old ladies. That's different from when we're talking about assisted living facilities. Those are the larger places. They do have a lot of times an independent wing. They have a lot of bells and whistles. They have the separate assisted living wing. A lot of these places have memory care as well. I'll get a little bit into this later, but again, we're talking about qualifying for adult family homes, assisted living facilities, or that memory care within an assisted living facility. A little background, because I think the background, just a little bite-sized background of Medicaid helps us to dig in the history of it. Medicaid, long-term care Medicaid that we're talking about, was a part of LBJ's Great Society program. And when you think about it, to put it bluntly, we had a program where if you were on government subsidized housing and you had government subsidized benefits, probably government subsidized, food and shelter costs as well, it would make sense that when you got old, the government would pay for that bill too. If you were in government housing on government benefits, you could transition right to that old folks' home and we'd pay for the bill for you to pass away there. In 1965, during the Great Society program, we had no idea how much longer people would live and how astronomical the care costs would be to keep those people alive with that level of care. I always tell clients, if we went back in time to 1980 and took out the yellow pages, which is the only way you found a lawyer back then, and we wanted to open up, we wouldn't find anyone that called themselves elder law. Elder law didn't really exist back then. Elder law was really created, and it became its own kind of subgenre, if you will, as more and more people needed to pay for more long-term care costs. More estate planning attorneys started seeing these issues come up enough to the point where they had to learn how to use this government program where, again, if you didn't have enough money and the government paid for the rest of your world and you were broke, they'd pay for somewhere for you to get care too. So the idea of that program is still the same, even though now the vast majority of people, a ton of my clients, they're not used to being on needs-based government programs. They're not used to the idea of these benefits. And the basic gist of it is still the same of, if you have the medical qualifications and you need this care provided, well then, if you're broke enough, the government will step in and help. And a lot of what we're working on is still that program of, what does it mean to qualify for this needs-based program, and how we go about doing it. I have right there, share. I can't see chat. This is great. Look at me learning something every day. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Lynn, Julie, can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we
Thank you.
can see it.
Thank
If
you. I think that's by me.
if you click on a slideshow
Yeah.
from the beginning, then it'll be bigger.
Okay. Yes, everyone says yes, yes, yes. Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. My name for this program, this presentation, which I've used for a few years now for anyone who's seen it, is the same. I call this Qualifying for Medicaid in the Middle Ages. And I call it that because one of my mom's jobs after she retired, because she needed to stay busy, she had a few part-time gigs, one of which was writing glossary definitions for a middle school history textbook. And she called me up one day and said, Josh, honey, I'm behind. I need you to do me a big favor. I need you to write a 130-page, 30-word definition of the Middle Ages. And I thought, Mom, if you said 13 words, that's probably pretty easy. If you told me 13,000 words, that's probably pretty easy too. 130 words is kind of just enough to not adequately explain everything. And I say this Medicaid presentation is like that, where it's just enough information to probably thoroughly make your head spin and confuse and frustrate you. I usually tell clients, if after this hour presentation you feel like, okay, I've got it, this program makes sense to me, we probably got something lost in translation. So this is, for the beginner, it's just enough information to confuse and befuddle you, but it's still, I'm still trying to give you as good as an idea. That just means take it easy on yourself if at the end of an hour you think, what the heck did he just say? Again, in order to qualify for long-term care Medicaid, we first need medical qualifications. That really means we need substantial assistance with 2 or more of the 7 specific activities of daily living: ambulation, bathing, feeding, transfer. I have never had someone say to me, I qualify for Medicaid, but the bad news is my loved one doesn't qualify for assistance with daily living. I tell clients, if you're over the age of 75 or 80, you probably need assistance with daily living more than you think. If in doubt, you could have a caregiver take a look. But again, I've never had that being an issue. A lot of people are doing having a caregiver take a look before they enter a facility. That's just so the owner of that facility, of that adult family home, can get an idea of kind of exactly what this person needs. In terms of qualifying for Medicaid, I'm not worried about medical qualification. I'm worried about financial qualification. There are major differences for married people and single people. And there's differences for skilled nursing versus in-home adult family assisted living. That non-nursing home care, which again, Alzheimer's and dementia, if anyone's had to deal with hospice and Alzheimer's or dementia, or what that means and all that, it's very difficult to get skilled nursing if Alzheimer's or dementia is involved, except for very serious separate medical issues. So we're really talking about this program, just so everyone knows, it's called COPES, the Community Options Program Entry System. What that really means is a lot of what I'm talking about today, the vast majority of it, we're talking about assisted living, we're talking about adult family homes, which is helpful for HOPE because that's where you end up with Alzheimer's or dementia. Income qualification really isn't much of an issue in the state of Washington. Again, I don't want to bog everyone down in the legal mumbo jumbo of the terms, but we are a spend down state, not an income tap state. What that really means, I have a lot of consultations of people who say to me, I'd like to qualify for Medicaid, but I make too much money. If if the income of the person in an assisted living facility or an adult family home, realistically, if their income's under 8 grand, I'm not worried about qualifying. The highest, I've only had one client where we actually had to look at income qualifications, and that was a client who made $8,200 a month. And that was last year. Every year, those income numbers go up. I tell clients, if the person in the facility makes less than 8 grand, I don't worry about their income. They'd qualify. Long story short, again, single, in-home, an adult family home, or an assisted living facility, $9,440, possibly higher. I'm not worried about people qualifying. And in skilled nursing facilities, as long as it's less than the private pay rate, you qualify. Income isn't an issue in terms of will you qualify. People have heard I make too much money, or I don't qualify for this or that. People are getting confused by the program. People are getting confused by sort of what's next. So the income, if we're talking about a married couple, which is what a lot of people want to know, the only income I'm looking at is the institutional spouse. So I'm always going to use the generic grandma and grandma. I only look at the name on the check. If grandpa's going into a facility and grandma makes $8,000 a month, and grandpa or grandma's going into a facility and grandpa makes 8 grand a month and grandma only made $775 a month in Social Security, I'm only looking at grandma's income. It doesn't matter how much grandpa makes, because grandma's the one who needs care. That's the only one whose income I'm looking at. I'm not worried. There we go. Not worried about grandma's income, about grandpa's. I'm focused on grandma, the person going into the facility. And so we have the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. When I'm using the term community spouse, just so everyone knows, I'm using the term community spouse, the person out in the community, not the institutionalized spouse, IS, the person we've placed somewhere. So this will come up a lot, where grandma comes to see me and grandma's check is only $775 a month in Social Security. What's she going to do when grandpa goes on Social Security? Well, or on Medicaid, I'm sorry. So grandma makes $775 a month. What are we going to do? She can't live on that. If grandma makes less than $2,465, she can keep a portion of grandpa's income to get her to at least that number. Now, again, I don't want to get deep into the weeds, but the minimum monthly maintenance grandma can keep between her check and grandpa's check, she can keep a total of $2,465. I tell clients, you never know when a caseworker is going to need a copy of every scrap of paper. So if you get those Social Security award letters every year, don't just toss them. It might be a paper burden. I tell clients, do me a favor. Every year, this might be being neurotic. You have a pension, you have Social Security. Keep those Social Security award letters. If you get a pension, like I do this with my mom gets a letter every year from her pension. It says, CalPERS, this is your award letter. It's dated January 2024. If I didn't get that every year, I'd call them and have them send it to me. You always want to know exactly what your gross income is for both parties. So that's one of the things I'm always asking a client. How much do you make? Separate from how much does your spouse make? So if a client is coming in, what's grandma take home each month? What's grandpa take home each month? Can you show me the exact numbers? Because I want to look at gross and net. Again, I don't want to overwhelm you with why, but I want to look at gross and net. A lot of what I'm doing is resources, financial qualifications. How much are you allowed to have? Medicaid is a needs-based program, and that means you can only have so much. Again, back to our initial idea of the government will pay for your care if you're broke enough. So the question here is, how do you qualify? For a single person, it is $2,000 in non-exempt resources. That's it. We'll get into exempt resources in a moment, but in terms of cash on hand, a single person qualifies when they're at or below $2,000. Putting it to you straight, once grandma has spent all her money, she transitions to Medicaid. My mom is on Medicaid right now. She's been on Medicaid for close to 2 years. She's been in the adult family home for over 3 years now. I believe when my mom passes away, my inheritance will be somewhere around $125 if she passed away tomorrow. And as my dad would have said, that's showbiz. And I sometimes have a lot of difficult conversations with clients of, if grandma doesn't have a lot of money, we're putting it to you straight. We're beginning what I call the world's most morbid horse race. We're writing a check for grandma's care each month, and we're going to see what goes first, grandma or the money. And again, as my dad would have said, that's showbiz. A lot of what I'm doing is helping a married couple, helping the community spouse, the healthy spouse, keep enough money to live on. There is a thing called a community spousal resource allowance. Married, and you're in the home, in an adult family home or an assisted living facility, husband and wife combined can have $70,301 at the time of the application, at the time you qualify. In fact, I will change that to application/qualification. I know it's neurotic. And what I'm applying, this is what's called a snapshot approach. The resources are determined at a specific time. Today is January 30. I have quite a few Medicaid applications right now. We're looking for qualification on February 1st. I'm working with those caseworkers right now, and I'm letting them know where we're at, and I have quite a few calls to make on Friday, because that's after January, after the 1st of the month, where I'm going to be sending bank statements over to caseworkers showing them we have applied for Medicaid. We're ready for benefits to kick in, because as of February 1st, my client and their spouse are at or below $70,301. If they're below that amount on the 1st of the month, we're good. And I tell clients, consider it a limbo contest. You have to get broke. You have to get to $70,301. You, the well spouse, don't have to stay below that. You have to be down here when you apply, but what happens afterwards doesn't matter. Major resource exemptions. One of the things I'm always happy to say, for a single person or married person, the home is an exempt resource, even for a single person. The home and home equity, so long as the person can say they want to go home, the home is exempt. In a minute, I'll get into, before we change this slide, what to do with the house for single people versus married people. A car can always be exempt. Household furnishings and personal effects are always exempt. Now, if you've had, rare paintings appraised, I wouldn't call that a household furnishing or a personal effect, but your stuff, we don't need to worry about your stuff. Burial plots, anything that is irrevocable burial funds, you're allowed to prepay for your last expenses. I, in fact, because my mom had a little money sent, my mom had enough money left to pay for this before she got on Medicaid. I prepaid for all my mom's funeral expenses. So it was all done properly by a funeral home that I use for this sort of thing. Everything's prepaid, everything's irrevocable. So my mom's funeral, basically her funeral expenses are done. Everything is paid for, from getting her from her adult family home to the funeral home, getting her ready, paying for her to get up to Willamette National to move in next to my dad. That is all taken care of. That is exempt. Life insurance with a cash value of less than $1,500. Some people paid for I see a lot of small life insurance policies. As long as there's cash under $1,500, it's exempt. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with this one again, but an annuity with no cash surrender value that is not assignable, with a payout period not longer than the life expectancy of the annuitant, and the state is named as the contingent beneficiary. This is known as a Medicaid compliant annuity or a single premium immediate annuity. I want to spend a couple minutes on this without getting too deep. And just so everyone knows, I have given a presentation where literally an hour of the presentation, I believe, was just about Medicaid compliant annuities, maybe more. Let me very briefly try and explain how this works. We just talked about the income of one party, but not both, counts for Medicaid. Grandpa's going into a facility. Grandma's staying at home. Let's pretend Grandma and Grandpa have $200,000 to their name. I know that Grandma's income doesn't matter. I don't count Grandma's income. They have $200,000, and I got to get them down to $70,301. What grandma can do with that extra money, the $130,000 over 70, grandma can purchase a Medicaid compliant annuity. So here's how that works. We want to qualify tomorrow and we've got way too much money. Grandma can purchase that annuity. The annuity, the money is gone. No givesy backsies. Grandma's paid for this annuity. She's purchased it. She's written a check. It's gone. In return, give me one moment. My son is watching me. He just got home from Taekwondo. I'll see you later, buddy. Okay, I'm giving my presentation, pal. Thanks, buddy. Sorry, I had a feeling he'd do that. So, to get from $200,000 to $70,000, grandma writes a check for this annuity. In return, grandma is getting an income. She's getting a check each month from the annuity company for that $130,000. She gets that money back as a check each month over a 5-year period. Here's what we've done. Grandma's gone in resources from here to here. We need to get below this to qualify. We also know grandma's income doesn't count past that. Grandma has to get broke. She doesn't have to stay broke. Now she's getting a check each month, and she can put that money in the bank, and we can get her back up to $200,000 slowly but surely over that 5-year period. Here's why there is no such thing as the perfect crime. At the very bottom, the state is named as the contingent beneficiary. If we write a check for $130,000 and grandma's getting that money as an income stream, she is going to get that $130,000 as income over the next 5 years. If grandma passes away during that 5-year period, the state gets all that money back. For that reason, I have a lot of clients where they come to me. The wife has been caring. The wife is, let's say they're both in their late 80s. The wife has been caring for her husband at home for a while. And without fail in these cases, the wife is 5 foot nothing and maybe 110 pounds. And you've been caring for your husband. How big is he? Oh, he's 6'2", 245 pounds. I don't know how confident I feel in the morbid horse race about placing a bet that grandma's going to last 5 years. Sometimes that's something we deal with, but because there's no such thing as the perfect crime, I have to think about how long will grandma qualify? How long will grandma be alive for? Will she be able to receive that income? And people will say to me, well, if I have to get from $200,000 or however much I have to $70,000, why can't I just write a check to my kids? Because there are transfers and penalties for those transfers. So, with some exceptions, within the date you're applying for Medicaid. So let's pretend I'm filling out a Medicaid application Friday for, beginning it in February. I will have to state whether from the 5 years before that application, before February, did that couple give money to anyone else? There is a penalty period for that. And it is when you would otherwise have qualified for Medicaid. So if grandma, again, she has only $2,000 left, that's when the penalty kicks in. So that means if grandma gave away $25,000, we'd basically be using that $25,000 to pay for her care on the other end. So there's no such thing as the perfect crime. There are certain exempt transfer penalty exceptions, but usually I'm telling people, if you gave money away in the last 5 years, you're probably going to have to give it back. There is no such thing as the perfect crime. That being said, so if, you're applying and someone wrote a check for 20 grand last month, all you have to do is write a check for 20 grand back. If you need to figure out the money from somewhere, friends, family members, someone who can help you out, beg, borrow, or steal. Again, I can't advise you to steal. Theoretically, you can request a waiver of penalty due to an undue hardship, but I tell clients you're opening a can of worms there, because if it's, well, grandma wrote us checks for 50 grand last year, but we spent all the money grandma gave us, sorry, they might say, okay, we can waive that penalty. And by the way, where would you like Adult Protective Services to give you a call? Adult Protective Services might get involved. if someone's given you a ton of money and you spent it, just be prepared for there to be some repercussions. Doesn't matter what you gave away 5 years ago. If you gave away $1 million 5 years and a day ago, doesn't matter. I don't need to worry about it. The total of all gifts does not exceed the daily private nursing facility rate in any month. I believe that number is $367. Basically, when I say penalty, that doesn't mean you can't take the kids out for dinner. It doesn't mean you can't, birthday gifts. You can't buy somebody a beer. You can buy them a beer. You can take them to dinner. You can buy them a present. If it's under $350, give or take, I'm not worried about it. Now, any transfer to a spouse or disabled child, you can transfer, and I get into this in a moment when it comes to estate recovery, of what you can do in terms of transferring resources between spouses and why that matters. This is mostly used for in-home care. If there's a family member who's moved in with someone who needs long-term care Medicaid, they're under $2,000. All they have is the house. And they're applying for in-home care so they can be the paid caregiver in that person's house. So let's pretend son or daughter moves in with mom. They've been mom's caregiver. Mom's on Medicaid now. And they're going to be the one paid by the state as the caregiver. Mom can transfer that home to a child who has lived in the home for 2 years, provided verifiable care. A lot of people move in, but I tell clients, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but it's very difficult for that exception to work unless you're living in the house. You can try and prove that the transfer is not to qualify for Medicaid or avoid estate recovery, but the burden's on you. I've had some cases where that's been successful, but the bigger the check and the closer you are to applying for Medicaid, the more difficult that'll be. Now, again, this is about estate recovery, and most of what we're talking about is the house, realistically. The state has the right to receive funds based on the care provided. Now, just so everybody knows, the recovery is against the estate of the person who received care. The recovery is against the legal idea of things that were in the name of the person who was on Medicaid. So that means if we have a husband and wife, we are transferring everything to the well spouse. Let's pretend. Let's turn that to AFH. I like that more. Home is owned by husband and wife, and the wife goes into an adult family home. I have a wife bring me a power of attorney, and the wife signs a deed transferring the house from her and her husband to just her. When husband passes away, the house is not in his name. Wife transferred the house from her and her husband to just her. There's no home in the husband's name. He has no estate, and the state doesn't recover against his care when he dies. Now, here's where it gets difficult. Let's pretend it's a single person. So again, mom's been in the home for years and years and years. And mom has 20 grand cash and she has the house. Mom's house is exempt. She doesn't have to sell that house. But if she goes on Medicaid, the state's going to attach a lien on the house and they have to get repaid first. I generally believe it's better if someone comes to me and they say mom has 20 grand to her name and she's got the house worth 400. I usually believe the best thing to do is to sell mom's house, put $420,000 in her bank account. Some people choose to rent out, a house, things like that, if they have enough cash. But again, the state can establish a lien. In the meantime, while mom is on Medicaid, the state has a lien. They're going to get repaid. Oop, hold on, my video froze. There we go. The state's going to get repaid. Most importantly, while there's that lien attaching, you still have to pay for the taxes. You have to pay for the upkeep. You have to pay for the utilities. There are a handful of exceptions. Usually these have been houses of really sentimental or historic value. A house that the kids grew up in, a house that's second or third generation, and we don't want to have to sell it. We're willing to pay the bills and deal with a lien down the road. Otherwise, I believe it's better to sell. Now, for COPES coverage, coverage is effective on the approval of the application. If we know someone qualifies for long-term care Medicaid when they're at or below $2,000, I don't want a client showing up saying to me, Grandma's at $2,000, I'm ready to start the application. I want that application 45 to 60 days in advance, because coverage is effective on the date you're approved, not the date you apply. So if someone comes to me and says, hold on, I froze again. If someone comes to me and says, we're at or below $2,000, I tell them you're going to have to work something out with that adult family home or assisted living facility, because Medicaid's not going to go through for a month or two. And I will tell you, lately, I have had applications that have just dragged and dragged and dragged. So I tell clients, don't wait for the last minute. You want to ensure yourself as easy of a landing as possible. Now, there's one other thing. We've talked about qualifying for Medicaid. We've talked about the fact that the government will chip in and they will basically pay for your care. You'll have to contribute your income, but they'll pay for your care. And when you're at or below, if you're a married couple, basically 70 grand cash, the house, the car, 70 grand, single person, $2,000. However, these facilities do not have to accept you as a Medicaid patient. And they can make you or require you to pay out of pocket for a certain amount of time. Some facilities are exclusively private pay. For example, a lot of people love, the Quarry. Quarry has a lot of bells and whistles. They don't accept Medicaid. So if a client says to me, I'm running out of money, I'm not sure what to do, my mom's been at the Quarry, for 6 months, but we're running out of money. The answer is every time you wrote a check to the Quarry, you were burning a pile of money. They're not obligated to accept Medicaid. Many adult family homes require a period of private pay. My mom, when I found an adult family home for my mom, I agreed to pay out of pocket for 18 months. Regardless of whether my mom was above or below $2,000, forget about that. I was obligated to write a check for 18 months. That was the minimum amount. So what that means is, if we have money if we have money in grandma's name, mom's name, again, $25,000, 50, 100, we might be spending a lot of that money on her care. And again, most reputable assisted living facilities and memory care facilities require 2 years at least. And a lot of them these days are 3 years. So if you're moving into a place and the rent is 8 to 10 grand a month for memory care, and you don't have enough money to pay that for 3 years, we need to figure something else out. Transferring from in-home or from an adult family home to a nursing home or another facility is allowable on Medicaid, but it's very difficult. So I'm telling people, obviously family dynamics complicate this. Get them into an adult family home or get them in an assisted living facility. Figure out where they're bottoming out at. I'm of the opinion, again, this is a personal opinion, but just from what I've dealt with, I believe paying for temporary in-home care is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. Unless you have a family member who's going to be willing to provide that round-the-clock care, you're kind of wasting time and money paying for in-home care. I'm of the opinion, again, one person's subjective opinion for Medicaid, find them an adult family home or assisted living, we'll get to that, and place them now. Every person thrives in a different situation, so I tell clients, I'm giving you advice. It's easy for me to say from this side. I advise hiring a placement service. There's a lot of reputable ones all across the county. I used a placement service for my mom and for my dad. I didn't find that needle in a haystack. I let someone find places for me. I personally, again, this is my subjective experience. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. I'm of the opinion that for Alzheimer's and dementia, you're likely going to get better care at an adult family home. Adult family homes can provide individualized care. That's a lot better for your loved one. My mom is in an adult family home. She was in assisted living before, and it wasn't a good fit. Assisted living was a good fit for my dad. It wasn't a good fit for my mom. Again, there's no right answer, but that's one person's subjective opinion. For senior living, assisted living can be great, but for Alzheimer's and dementia, that isn't really ideal. One of the problems and one of the limiting things that I'm looking for, most adult family homes aren't lockdown facilities. So if you have a loved one who's looking for the exit and wandering out into the street every chance they get, you're probably looking at memory care, which are lockdown facilities. Again, I use what happened with my parents where mom and dad were living with me. Then they moved to independent senior living. Then they moved to assisted senior living. Dad chose to stay in assisted living. It was great for him being in a bigger place. He had friends. He had the movie theater. He had the dining hall. Mom was really, really going downhill fast. We moved her to an adult family home, and mom really thrived there. Mom's in an adult family home now. I write a check each month to contribute towards the cost of my mom's care. Now that she's widowed, I write a check each month. My mom is allowed to keep $100 a month in a personal needs allowance. I spend the money on haircuts. I spend the money on Milano cookies. As I say, what do you get the woman who has everything? There's no right place for every person, but again, one person's subjective opinion, that is what we are looking at. Okay, I have Q&A. I am sure there is a lot of chats. Let me start with the questions that are open here. Someone asked, what about if they want to stay in their own home and have family be a paid caregiver? You can apply, again, a person can apply to be a paid caregiver, paid for by the state. If you can keep them in the home and they can have in-home care and someone's willing to do it, you can apply and coordinate that through the state. Someone asked about ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are ways to preserve money for people who are under certain ages. They have to have been disabled by the age of 30. ABLE accounts is something we use. Usually they're involved for children with special needs, not as much as Alzheimer's and dementia, because usually those people were over the age of 30 once they started going downhill. Will you receive a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, you will. I don't know what the annual question was. I hope I answered it. Applying for financial qualification. I applied for Medicaid for my mom, and I had to prove she was at or below $2,000. Every year, I do have to prove that she is still under $2,000. Every year, there's an approval. Not every month. It's not only once, but you have to verify. And of course, there is an issue, which we can get into if someone wants to ask about what you do if someone's on Medicaid and they receive money from an inheritance or a settlement. What do you do when you're over $2,000? Do companies like A Place for Mom provide a good service? I think there's all sorts of different places. I personally used a private placement advisor for my parents. I'm on the Oregon side. I used a guy by the name of Peter. Peter was great. Peter found a fantastic adult family home for my mom. Visiting my mom can really be tough, but every time I always say to myself, thank goodness Peter found Leah. My dad ended up going on hospice briefly towards the end of his life. He was at an adult family home. I called up Peter and I said, Peter, you wouldn't believe it. I've got another parent who I need to place. And Peter helped me find an adult family home for the last couple weeks for dad. An example, yeah, it's dependent on the person who helps. Would I say, in other words, me personally, would I say A Place for Mom's the best? Not across the board, because it's all individual. It's like Edward Jones, it's like Raymond James. Edward Jones or Raymond James doesn't mean something's great. A Place for Mom doesn't mean something's great, but the individual person can be. Nancy says thanks. You're welcome, Nancy. What does COPE?
Joshua,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt 1 second related to A Place for Mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be that our experience as an organization, because we deal with lots of folks who are doing placement, is that A Place for Mom is a national organization.
Right.
And the best luck that our folks have encountered is to use somebody that is local because they really know them personally. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a good experience with A Place for Mom. but we have some really good local organizations that we rely on and that we refer to. So
I thank you, Lynn. I wasn't trying to endorse anyone or throw anyone under
no,
the bus.
I totally
So
understand.
I
Totally get
appreciate
it.
you doing that. I appreciate you doing that. What does COPE stand for, Bonnie? COPE stands for the Community Options Program Entry System. And just so you know, Bonnie, I wrote that down so that I could remember because I've given this presentation and forgotten what COPES stands for. I just throw COPES around so much. So if I'm calling another attorney, no one, I'm not calling a friend and saying, hey, I have a question about the Community Options Program Entry System. I'm going to call up another attorney and say, hey, can I run something by you? Yeah, it's a COPES case. Is the caregiver or spouse allowed to have an IRA or retirement income? There's two separate things there, Angie. The caregiver spouse can have retirement income if you're caring for your spouse, if you're moving them into the facility of the community spouse. However, the IRA is an available resource. Remember, we're talking about a program where if you're broke enough, taxpayer dollars will pay for your care. So what that means is let us know when you're broke enough. And if a client comes to me and says the only thing we have is an IRA, it's in my spouse just went into a facility. He has an IRA, there's $200,000 in it. Do I have to take money out of that to qualify for Medicaid? The answer is yes. And if a client says to me, I would end up taking a giant tax hit if I took that money out, if I was able to say it as brusquely as I needed to sometimes, I'd say, I'm sorry to hear you're going to take a giant tax hit. Let me know when you've done it. IRAs are not exempt, even though they're tax deferred and you would take a giant tax hit if you had to liquidate an account. Sometimes you have to do it. Good question, Sue. So mom has 2,400 in Social Security and 400 in pension. I'm talking about two separate things, Sue. I'm talking about income and resources. My mom makes $4,500 a month in income. Her resources, her bank account is under $2,000 because, and let me clarify this because this sometimes gets confusing, and this is for, I'll say Sue because I'm answering Sue's question, but this would go for anyone. My mom still gets her retirement income, Sue. She gets a pension and she gets Social Security. Those don't magically go away, but I have to contribute. I have a participatory payment. I have to basically, I'm using taxpayer dollars to cover the difference between my mom's income and the cost of her care. Because I'm using taxpayer dollars to pay for that, I got to have some skin in the game. My mom has to contribute towards her care. I'm writing a check for $4,400 each month. My mom only keeps $100 in a personal needs allowance. So even though her income is more than $2,000, Sue, because I'm writing a check every month, she's always below $2,000 at the end of the month. So if we're talking about income versus resources, it doesn't matter what you make because you're going to be writing a check. It matters how much you keep at the end of the month. Is the community spouse allowed to earn income through their own business? Yes. And your income. So if Phyllis has, let's pretend Phyllis has a company and it's Phyllis's Quilting LLC. I'm sorry if you don't like quilting, Phyllis. Let's say Phyllis has Phyllis's Quilts LLC. Doesn't matter what Phyllis's income is. If Phyllis's husband is in a facility, we're counting his income. Phyllis can make all the money she wants from her quilts. What do you charge for an in-person appointment with you to apply for Medicaid? Mary, it depends. I know. I'm sorry. It's such a I used to hate when my wife and I were getting married, and none of the places you get married would tell you, hey, here's how much we charge for a wedding. It was always call us so we can figure out how to make your special day even more special. Not everyone needs an attorney to apply for Medicaid, Mary. I do a lot of work. My consultation fee is $250. I have a lot of people, they come in, we go over questions. The answer is you don't need me to apply. All they need is a consultation fee. For applications, it depends on the complexity. I have plenty of clients, and this is for if you're established, if we've done Medicaid work, we've had some consultations. I had a client who would show up at my door with a 6-pack of cold tall boys of beer, and he'd say, I have a quick question for you. And I would happily accept his payment and answer his quick question. If I've dug in, so the answer is $250 for a consultation. Applications, I hate to say it depends, but it depends. If you've worked with me before and you have a quick question, let me know when you'll be by and bring me a case of beer. And if you're not bringing me a case of beer, if you've just gotten cold beer, you have to bring me less cold beer than warm beer, just so you know. What if the IRA is in the healthy spouse's name and the care receiver is not listed as beneficiary? It doesn't matter. Angie, if you're applying for Medicaid for your husband and you have $500,000 in an IRA, that's an available resource, and we have to figure out a way to reduce that amount. Yes, Richard, I am saying if your wife not even makes less, if your wife has income below a certain amount, you can have $70,000 of assets. You can keep your house. You're not going to be out on the street, and you can still qualify. Some of my favorite consultations, they end up being some of my favorites, not always at the beginning, but when I say to a client, tell me what's going on, and they immediately burst into tears. And a lot of those consultations are me telling people at the end of it, remember, you're not going to be out on the street. You don't have to spend every penny. And most importantly, I will say this, you don't have to get divorced. This is another thing, Richard. You can have a certain amount of income. Your wife makes $2,000 a month. You can still have $70,000. You can still have the house. I don't know where people hear this of, I like to see you because I heard you need to get divorced to get on Medicaid. You don't. There are ways to qualify. Don't get divorced just for Medicaid. Would you want to get down to about $8,000, give or take, Shelley? It depends on what I call the burn rate. Depends on income, depends on how much the facility is. Thank you so much for answering. You're welcome, Mary. I had one more question here. I was told that placement services could not work with individuals that are on Medicaid. So generally they are not. So again, another reason, if you're looking for a facility, do not look for a facility. Do not go on in-home care Medicaid as a stopgap and then try and figure out an adult family home. Like everything else in this world, money buys you time, money buys you options. If someone says to me, Mom has $10,000 and we need to find a facility, maybe we can work a miracle, but it's a lot easier if Mom had $110,000 and we could find a few more places. Karen had a question here. Few memory care facilities accept Medicaid. What options are there locally or out of county? When I'm talking about Medicaid or memory care, Karen, I'm thinking in my head, and Karen can answer this in chat if this is what she's thinking. I'm thinking of the kind of memory care where we need a lockdown facility. There are some places that accept Medicaid that are lockdown facilities. Again, find a local placement advisor. As Lynn said, there's lots of great people in the county. There's people I use all the time. If you're looking for a needle in a haystack yourself, it might feel like nobody accepts Medicaid and you have no idea where to start. That's why in this day and age, you have to use a placement facility. Anyone else with a queue with any questions? I always like answering the random questions. Yes, need a locked facility. There are memory care facilities that accept Medicaid, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There aren't a ton, and they cost a lot of money. I'd talk with a placement advisor about what you need there. And that's answering Karen Wilson here. I also have, as I was saying this question for Richard, I had, Richard, what great news. Those are some great consultations for me. I also have a lot of consultations where we're going through all this, where I have to tell clients when it comes to Medicaid planning, everything you heard was incorrect. What you were hoping would happen isn't going to happen. There's no magic wand, and it seems to me like you're kind of screwed. So now what are you going to do? I like those because I think it's easy. I had that moment of panic and denial with my parents where, again, without getting too deep into it, my parents' long-term care bill for assisted living between the two of them went from what would have been they'd have enough money to cover everything to them being out of pocket down about $4,500 to $5,000 a month. And I got off the phone with my attorney friend who went over this with me for VA benefits. And I got off the phone with my friend Rebecca, and I put my parents' phone down, and I said, wow, everything that I hoped would happen isn't going to happen. It looks like I'm totally screwed. And I wallowed for about a day. And speaking of that cold beer I sometimes take, I drank a lot of cold beer. And the next day I said, okay, looks like I'm screwed. Nothing that I hoped would happen is going to happen. Now what am I going to do? Do I have recommendations for an elder law attorney for Oregon in Washington County? I do, Beth. If anyone needs, my mom's in Oregon. I know just enough about Oregon to be dangerous, but Oregon and Washington are entirely different kettles of fish. If anyone needs a referral for Oregon, I'm happy to give some names. There's an attorney I use a lot in Troutdale. My personal Medicaid attorney, she's busy, so she's hard to reach. I wish more people could see her, but she's in Portland. She does Washington County. Boy, how far in advance should you get a consultation? I tell clients I tell clients you should probably it'd be beneficial to talk once you have that precipitating event. And I tell clients when I say precipitating event, that's my very gentle legal way of saying you have a diagnosis, someone's going downhill, you have a stroke, something like that. Occasionally, maybe once a year, once every other year, I'll have an appointment, and the notes from my paralegal for the appointment say want to talk about Medicaid and long-term care. And when I have that appointment for Medicaid or long-term care, the people come into my office and they say, we just retired, we're both doing great, but we're just curious what long-term care is like. And I have to tell them, I hate to say it, but until one of you gets a horrible diagnosis or has a terrible stroke or something terrible, we're not doing any Medicaid planning that far out in advance. Do you have a Vancouver office? I do. My office is in Vancouver. I just moved 3 months ago, actually. For those of you who had been to my old office on Broadway, I just moved to the Howard House in Fort Vancouver. Julie and Lynn visited. I bought them coffee so they could see the new office. I love it. It's in the historic Howard House. It's built in 1879. It's got a lot of character. It's really nice. I'm very happy I'm there. It has very high ceilings. It feels very big too. It's nice to be there. 7:23. Usually I'm answering questions till after 7:30. Are
Well,
there any
I
other?
have some questions for you.
Okay, please.
So you just thought you were done.
Yeah, Shelley said, thank you so much. You are so kind to share all of this in your own story. I'm always happy to help. I tell clients I've been down every rung on that ladder down to hell. If anyone was in the yes, my new office does have stairs, but I have an elevator. My contact information is on the front page. For those of you who went to my old office, whoops, sorry. I have an elevator in the Howard House. I now don't have to make as many house calls as I used to. It's very nice. But yes, yay on the elevator. Um, I tell for those of you who are anyone who is in a hope group with my dad, um, oh, again, the reason why this is what I like to do, and I'm going to try not to get all verklempt, but I've been missing him lately. Is I know how hard it is. I tell clients I tell clients the good news is you'll probably survive. I can't guarantee in what shape you'll be on the other side, but you'll make it. And so
So
I'm always happy to help and share my story.
don't forget my questions here.
Please, please.
So how challenging is it to apply on your own without help?
Not impossible. And I do tell clients you can apply on your own. It might be a lot of work, but you can apply online. I tell clients there are three main situations where a client hires me for a Medicaid application. The first one, the first time someone, reason someone might go to me is they have a very complex financial situation. Maybe there were gifts to explain. We need a Medicaid compliant annuity. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a unique asset. There's a weird wonky thing, and a cover letter from me will explain a lot. The second situation, there are some clients who are, the clients themselves, they're older, they're not as tech savvy, they'd like everything to go through me. They bring me what I need. I fax everything over. I do the financial interview. The last situation people hire me, being honest, they are so emotionally drained that they are just, I don't want to do any of this myself. I'm jumping at everything. I'm exhausted. I'm stressed. I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. Please, for the love of God, let me pay you so I don't have to do this. And I tell clients, you don't need me for this. I told a client last week, you don't need me. You can get under the car and change the oil on this yourself. But that is when clients hire me.
So if
Mhm.
once you've completed an application and
Mhm.
it's filed,
Mhm.
how long does it typically take to know if whether or not it's approved?
I was just telling Lynn before we started this, applications are taking longer and longer. And I'm leveling with you folks. I have a couple stressful applications now where it's, the application has taken way longer than 45 to 60 days. And what I'm going to have to do right now is, boy, you know, we're just going to have to talk to the facility and hope they understand. Applications are taking a while right now. Things had caught up for a while, but right now there's a big backlog. And just so you can deal with the stress of my life, I was telling Lynn and Julie, different financial caseworkers want different information. They work at different paces. Um, so it can sometimes feel frustrating. Again, I tell clients you'll make it. Thank you, Lori. We miss your dad too. I was very briefly, Lori, again, I was sad and thinking about him. For those of you who might not know, my dad and I loved professional wrestling. Whenever Monday Night Raw was in town, we'd go. And 3 weeks ago now, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, wrestling was in Portland. My mother-in-law was in town. My wife, me, my son, and my mother-in-law all went to Monday Night Raw at the Motor Center. And all I was thinking was, boy, do I wish Pop was still alive so he could go to wrestling with Roddy. But there you go.
So talk a little bit about Medicaid
Mhm.
pending.
Mhm. Well, Medicaid pending is getting deep into the weeds on it. Like, I have a case now. They're out of money for February 1st. I'm hoping, and they're under no obligation to help me out. I'm hoping this caseworker will get me approved for February 1st. There's a case, there's a chance we might not be ready till March. And I got to level with you. There's no easy answers on this one. And my best advice for this client, I'm going to write a letter on letterhead basically saying the state can backdate us to February, but there's no guarantee. I'd suggest to this client, write a check for mom's income, contribute what you can, and just let the place know, please don't evict me. I'm trying my hardest.
Okay.
Angie's asking if I'm sounds like the beginning of the month, and if it doesn't happen then next month versus mid-month. Again, not to get too deep into the weeds, but so what we can do is, again, I'm trying to figure out a way to explain this, Shelley, without it getting too confusing. You have to prove you'd be at or below that, the $2,000 or $70,000 by the first of the month. Sometimes that's not approved. They don't finish the application until, let's say, the 15th. But if you've paid the facility on the first, you can't get Medicaid that month. This is the difficult timing question. There's a lot of people where the adult family home, they say we're going to get approved for Medicaid backdated to the first, I promise, and the facility says that's very nice. I need my check. And if you write a check, well, then we're waiting for March 1st. The
And
whole
then
application process, again, it's tricky, it's frustrating. I have a couple applications that have dragged on. I'm working on the timing. Boy, hold on, my video froze again. I hope you can hear me. I have a couple applications right now. Boy, I wake up in the middle of the night and I really like to figure out when on earth we're going to have approval and if it's going to be backdated at all. I have a couple cases really bugging me.
so if you are denied, when can you apply again?
So if you're denied, apply the next day. I have some people who apply and they were denied for incorrect reasons or there was a miscommunication, I fund a Medicaid compliant annuity. I sort out why they get denied. We apply again the next day. Or we keep that application open and see if it's still open. This is a good question, and I want to answer. Lynn, do you have more questions?
Go ahead.
Okay. What happens to the other bills the person who goes into care has? Asked by Beth Fitzpatrick. Oh boy. Okay. And I missed a question again. I'm sorry I missed. Let me go back one, Beth. I'm trying to answer everyone's question. Mary, if your husband goes on Medicaid in the home with a caregiver, it's difficult to switch to a facility. I always advise if they're going to end up in a facility, send them to a facility. Beth, the bills don't go away, but I sometimes advise clients not to pay them. My mom had a couple bills remaining, or if someone has a credit card and we're trying to get them at or below $2,000 for long-term care, I usually tell someone, well, we're going to need to pay for that money. We're going to use that money to pay for mom's care. So Beth, if mom has a $5,000 credit bill, you write Discover card and you say, I've received this bill. I am my mom's attorney, in fact, an agent pursuant to the attached power of attorney. My mom is at a long-term care facility. She pays XYZ per month. I don't anticipate she will be making payment on this bill in the future at all. And they write it off because what are they going to do? Ruin mom's credit? What happens to the other bills they have? If they're married or if they're single, don't worry about them. Do hospice facilities take Medicaid? Hospice is hospice, and it isn't what people think it is. For very short-term clear hospice, some places they cover it. Alzheimer's and dementia or a lot of other hospices, you're paying for a facility out of pocket. One of the things I tell people when it comes to hospice, this applies for hospice, this applies to, I give an example of Lou Gehrig's disease too. When we're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, that's like the ideal vision of long-term care. That person could pass away tomorrow, or they could pass away in 5 years. We have to plan for each of those. If someone's terminal and doctors give them a month to live and it's a cancer that you can tell they're going downhill, I'm not worried about long-term care.
So, a hospice facility such as the Ray Hickey House, if a person is on Medicaid, that residential fee is paid for by Medicaid.
Yes. I know Hickey does that, but again, that's people who are on Medicaid who are moving to Hickey short term. My mom's technically on hospice, but Medicaid pays for her, facility. I don't even know why she's on hospice. We put her on and now it's inertia because we thought my mom was going downhill. And then, of course, my mom being my mom, she isn't. So she's on hospice, but who cares? Lynn, what other questions did you have?
I'm some of them you actually answered, which is cool. Maybe a little bit more clarification on the estate having to pay back Medicaid provided benefits.
Yeah.
And about liens.
You can always negotiate, but if someone was on Medicaid, they passed away and there was a house in their name, the state will attach a lien. Now, the state will never force you out. So if there's a child living in the house, if there's a family member living in the house, someone's on Medicaid, the state's not going to say they have to get out. They will be patient. They'll wait 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. The clock is ticking, but a lien attaches if someone has a house and they pass away owning that house when they went on Medicaid. I'm not sure there's a lot of, again, ins and outs, a lot of questions about Medicaid liens, but the long and the short of it is don't pass away with a house in your name when you're on Medicaid. Well, there's caregiver exemptions. There's other exemptions as well. There's ways, again, we can transfer the house, but if someone has a house in their name, we're out of luck. And by the way, Carol here, single and 83, in fairly good shape, still working and driving. Good for you, Carol. Would a consult now be sensible? Depends how neurotically worried you are about a quote unquote event happening. Some people are come to me and they say, listen, I'm 85 or I'm 90 and I'm doing great for 85 or 90, but I want to start giving money to my kids now in case something happens 5 years from now. Some people do talk about that, Carol. It depends. For the Carols of the world, no kids, Carol, live your life. My mother-in-law is 80. She's the Energizer Bunny. She's going to keep going for forever. She has more energy than me. My mother-in-law is not doing any Medicaid planning. She's going to live to 190. That's good. I like my mother-in-law. That wasn't a mother-in-law insult. She's great. Yeah, no
So,
kids,
so
Carol, live your life.
clarify
Mhm.
that annuity thing and the 5 years.
Okay.
So you live past 5 years, then what?
Mhm. Nothing. Congratulations, you got all your money back.
So, and you got it all back. Okay.
hmm
Okay.
hmm hmm Medicaid annuities. I have a case right now. We have all sorts. We had to use all sorts of Medicaid annuities. Thank goodness. Mary Elliott asked, how do you go about transferring your husband's name off your condo? If you have a power of attorney, it's easy. Bring me the power of attorney. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this, but if someone has Alzheimer's or dementia and you don't have a power of attorney, then you can't, then we have to look at other options. Oh, my son's okay. Sorry, I heard my son crying. I think he tripped and hurt his foot. Okay. In the 5 year look back period, what do I need? Boy, Angie, it depends on the caseworker. I don't need 5 years worth. I tell clients, I won't, Angie, I would say to you, I wouldn't need 5 years worth of bank statements, Angie, unless I do. How's that? It's like I used one of the first things law school professor said one of our first days of law school for a personal injury case is ignorance is never an excuse except for when it is. So Angie, I don't need all the bank statements unless I do. I usually tell clients again, don't give me a stack this high. I'll tell you what I need when I need it, but be prepared to have that stack handy because I might need the whole stack. You're welcome.
I,
Any other
s-
questions, Lynn?
I see a Q&A question.
I do too. We answered Carol's. Is it legal to supplement an adult family home rate? Uh, some places do. It worries me a little bit because theoretically they're not supposed to. Um, I'm not here to say there aren't reputable places who you need to pay a little bit under the table to supplement, but it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. Um, Again, is it legal? Let's not talk about that. What kind of beer do I like? Cheap and domestic. No IPAs, don't microbrews, none of that. Go to the far left side of the beer case at Fred Meyer. Find the beer that's on sale that month. That's my favorite beer. Now, this is a difficult one. Martha says, Leroy and I aren't legally married due to losing military benefits. He has rapidly declining dementia and Edward Jones account. You have nothing other than 5 grand in a savings account. We jointly own the house together. So, Martha, you would never have to leave the house. But if Leroy went on Medicaid, you're not married, and the house is in both your names, the state would have a lien and would be repaid from Leroy's portion when he and you passed away or moved out. I think that one sounds like a relatively tricky one. So this is just, we're sitting at the Tip Top Tavern on Main Street. Martha sat down next to me. We started talking about Medicaid. That's my quick offhand answer. Um, I have had clients who one of them was going downhill. They'd been married, they divorced, but stayed living together. And I told them, I might hear wedding bells in your future. There are things married people can do that unmarried people can't do. Oof. Anything
Well,
else? I see. I always go over 7:30. That's okay.
Well, no, that's awesome. You could go until 8 o'clock if you could stay awake that long.
Try a couple more. Let's see what I got.
Okay. I've heard that it's hard to find doctors that take Medicaid. Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't, but I don't have much knowledge on that part of the equation. Occasionally clients have told me their experiences. I mean, putting it to you straight, like I give the example of with my mom, there's a doctor from Providence who goes over to the adult family home and sees her. I'm fine with that. I'm not a real pro when it comes to the health insurance part. I haven't had anyone say to me, I'm on Medicaid and now I just can't get any doctors. So I haven't had that happen. That's not something that's come across my desk a lot.
Okay. So is it okay if we provide your slides to the people that are attending?
Please do, of course.
Wonderful,
Does the
wonderful.
annuity have to be set up prior to the application? Yes.
Oh, prior to the Medicaid application?
hmm
Okay, got it.
What can married people do that unmarried people can't do? They can keep more money, they can keep more money, they can transfer the house, they can keep income. It's for Medicaid purposes if two people are living together again and they're boyfriend and girlfriend, but they haven't wanted to get married for various reasons. Well, I tell them, there are worse fates than being married.
So with that annuity, that would not work if you were not married.
Right. We don't use annuities for single people in the state of Washington
Okay,
because you have to contribute all your income towards the cost of your care.
okay.
You want me to say that again, Lynn?
Uh, what, could you hear my wheels turning?
I could.
Yes, say that again, please.
So, if Lynn and I are married and I'm going into an assisted living facility, again, Lynn can keep all the income in her name. I have to contribute my income towards the cost of my care. But Lynn can keep the income annuity and can receive that money and can hold on to it and can live her life in our house. If I pass away and Lynn's now a widow and Lynn needs to move into a facility, Lynn, you're going to have to contribute all your income towards the cost of your care. So if you receive $2,000 a month from an annuity, you're going to have to contribute that money. So we're using Medicaid compliant annuities for married couples when we need to get from $200,000 or whatever to $70,000, and we're transferring this income to the well spouse. I need a well spouse to give that income to.
I think that is really, really helpful information.
I know it's tricky. So again, if someone makes an appointment and says, I listened to your presentation, could you repeat everything you said? Yes, I understand.
Okay. There's another question for you. Can you keep Medicare
Medicare
supplement health
supplement health insurance. Yes. Keep your Medigap coverage. Don't cancel any coverage. Keep all your health insurance. My mom keeps her Medigap coverage. It pays for everything. She's still on her same insurance. You stay on your same insurance. Maybe that's why people don't complain. That just occurred to me. That's why you wouldn't complain because the doctor takes your Medicare coverage, your Medigap coverage that supplements your Medicare Part B. So you're okay. A good question here. If you transfer the house through a trust, does that protect the house from a lien? No, it has to be in your individual name at the time of application. Again, I'm getting deep into the weeds, but this is the fun of the question and answer session. If Don and his wife have the Ford Revocable Living Trust, Don, if you have a revocable living trust, and your wife is going into a Medicaid facility, in order to qualify and in order to prevent a lien from attaching, you want to transfer that house from the trust to your individual name. And it's beyond the scope of our conversation at 7:45, But if that's what's going on with Don, Don and I would have a talk about what he does after that with the house that's now in his name. Long story short, no, we don't have houses in revocable trusts. You're
So
in. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
as a widowed
Mhm.
person who has a living trust,
You, Lynn, have property in a revocable trust, which you are doing for estate planning purposes that are unrelated to long-term care Medicaid.
okay, so it doesn't apply at all. Okay.
Right. There are no magic wand trusts in the state of Washington when it comes to revocable trusts. Again, there's a whole separate presentation I could give on estate planning and Medicaid and all that stuff.
Okay, you got a couple more questions
Yes.
there.
Mary says, clarify, please. My income is Social Security only. Husband has Social Security and pension. Are you able to keep any of his money? Yes, you are. You can keep, if your Social Security, Mary, is less than $2,465, you can keep a portion of his income. Tracy is watching this seminar because her parents live in Washington. How different is Oregon? Different enough. If you have Oregon questions, I can give you the name of some Oregon attorneys. For married couples, I don't want to get too, again, at 7:47, I don't want to get too deep into it. But for the Tracys of the world, if you're on the fence between Oregon or Washington and it's a married couple, move them to Washington.
All right. Joshua, thank you.
Anything else?
Probably, but
I sighed a lot, but this again, these are some of my favorite presentation. My favorite presentation of the year is the Hope presentation.
well,
Without a doubt.
it's just so useful because there is so much concern.
This is what it's for.
Exactly. So I did want to let everybody know that in case you haven't seen the countless flyers, that we have a health and resource fair at Keller Williams Premier Partners on Mill Plain on Saturday, the 3rd, that everyone is welcome to attend. And then our next presentation on the 28th of February is actually regarding brain health. And I will send that out. And when Joshua gives me his slides, I'll send these out as well.
Thank you for
Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you for gently reminding me. I will make sure. There we go. Presentation materials. Okay. So
Awesome.
I will send it before I forget tonight, Lynn.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks everyone for coming.